When you think of America's Appalachian Trail, the 2,160-mile path that stretches from Georgia to Maine, you may be more likely to think of happy family bonding moments and endorphin highs that come along with getting active in the great American outdoors. But did you know that there is a darker side to the famed trail? The Appalachian Trail has actually been the site of numerous murders and other gruesome deaths over the years. Although you are still more likely to run into problems on the trail because of inclement weather or slipping and falling, violent crime on the trails is not an uncommon occurrence. The first white men to venture across the wide Missouri were awed by the breathtaking sight of the majestic Rocky Mountains towering over 14,000 feet. Known as the Shining Mountains by Native Americans, these glittering giants nearly thwarted Lewis and Clark's expedition from 1804 to 1806. Yet they pressed on, paving the way for the daring mountain men. Join us as we uncover the Appalachians' deadly mountain men's forgotten history. In the late 1760s and early 1770s, Euro-American settlers began pouring into what is now northeastern Tennessee and southwestern Virginia, causing considerable agitation among the Overhill Cherokees and other tribes who controlled the area. The Treaty of Lochaber, signed in 1770 between the British and the Cherokee, moved the boundary of British territory south to Long Island of the Holston. While this brought settlements north of the Holston under British protection, the settlers south of the river were ordered to leave. Rather than comply with the Crown's order, the illegal settlers, mostly concentrated at the Watauga settlement at Sycamore Shoals, the Nolichucky settlement, and Carter's Valley, decided to lease their land from the Cherokee, and in 1772 established the Watauga Association, which was the first independent American constitutional government west of the Appalachians. In 1775, the Watauga and Nolichucky settlers purchased their leased lands outright and formed the independent Washington District. They almost immediately petitioned Virginia for annexation, which was denied. They were later annexed by North Carolina and became Washington County, North Carolina. The Crown and the colonial governments, especially Virginia, considered the land purchases illegal and ordered the settlers to leave what they considered to be Cherokee lands. Also, some factions of the Cherokee became agitated when these settlements began expanding rapidly, and tribal chiefs, amiable to the settlers, fell out of favor. A young Cherokee chief dragging canoe, who had been opposed to the sale of tribal lands, called for the violent removal of all European settlers west of the mountains. He led an estimated 1,000 followers, eventually referred to as the Chickamauga, away from the American settlements, and carried on an armed struggle against the new country for almost 20 more years after the failed Cherokee attacks against the over-mountain settlements in the summer of 1776. At the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1776, the over-mountain settlers, most of whom were Whigs opposed to the monarchy, began preparing for invasion. The signing of the Watauga Petition and its acceptance by North Carolina, annexing the Washington District to that colony, added further impetus to the Cherokee, who were also banned by the British to push the American frontiersmen out of the fight. Over mountain settlements, the invasion came in July of that year. While settlers were chased out of Carter's Valley and the Nolichucky settlements, the Cherokee were defeated at Eaton Station on July 20 and at Fort Watauga on July 21, and eventually retreated from the area. The settler struggles gained them the sympathies of North Carolina's revolutionary leaders, who in 1777 allowed the settlements of the Washington District to join equally with the colony, designating the Over-Mountain area as the original Washington County, North Carolina. The Over-Mountain men took part in numerous operations against British loyalists and the British-aligned Cherokee and Shawnee all along the Appalachian frontier. 20 Watagans helped defend the Boonesboro and Harrodsburg settlements from Shawnee attacks in 1778. During the summer of 1780, a group of Over-Mountain men, led by Isaac Shelby, joined up with Colonel Charles McDowell to raid Loyalist outposts in the Piedmont Mountain region of northwestern South Carolina. The Over-Mountain men captured Fort Thickety on the Pacolet River and aided in the Patriot victory at the Battle of Musgrove Mill. With the approach of the 1780 harvesting season, however, most of the Over-Mountain men returned to their farms on the frontier. McDowell stayed behind with a small contingent to continue harassing Loyalists. After winning a decisive victory at the Battle of Camden in August 1780, British General Charles Cornwallis invaded North Carolina. He sent Major Patrick Ferguson into the mountains to root out the Patriot irregulars and protect the region's Loyalists. Ferguson quickly routed McDowell's badly outnumbered force, and McDowell retreated across the mountains to the Washington district. Ferguson pardoned a captured frontiersman named Samuel Phillips, a cousin to Isaac Shelby, so that Phillips could carry a message to the Over-Mountain settlements. In the message, Ferguson warned the Over-Mountain men that if they didn't lay down their arms, he would march his army over the mountains, hang their leaders, and lay waste the country with fire and sword. Upon receiving the message, Shelby rode 40 miles to Waughty-Ugai to consult with John Sevier, and the two agreed to raise armies and cross the mountains to engage Ferguson. On September 25, 1780, several hundred frontiersmen gathered at Sycamore Shoals. The lead had been mined at nearby Bumpass Cove for ammunition. Sullivan County merchant John Adair volunteered funds for the expedition, and women prepared clothing and food for the long march. Black powder for the expedition was manufactured by Mary Patton at the Patton Mill along the nearby Powder Branch. The assembled force consisted of 240 men, led by Sevier from Washington County, North Carolina, and the other counties of the Washington District, 240 from Sullivan County, led by Shelby, and 400 from southwestern Virginia, led by Colonel William Campbell. This main body planned to meet up with the remnants of McDowell's army in the mountains, bringing the total number to just over 1,000. Home guards were left at Holston, and Watauga under Anthony Bledsoe and Charles Robertson, respectively. Campbell and his company of 400 Virginians gathered in Abingdon on lands owned by Captain Andrew Colville, now known as the Abingdon Muster Grounds, on the banks of Wolf Creek on September 23, 1780, and began the first leg of the march to meet up with a group of Tennessons at Rocky Mount on September 24th. They arrived at Sycamore Shoals on the 25th. On September 26th, after a fiery sermon by Reverend Samuel Doak, the Over-Mountain men began their long trek over the Blue Ridge, marching from Sycamore Shoals to Shelving Rock at the base of Roan Mountain, where they camped for the night. After crossing the mountain at Yellow Mountain Gap, they followed a well-worn path up the North Toe River Valley to Bright Settlement. On September 29th, the force split up at Gillespie Gap, with Campbell's contingent descending to Wofford's Fort in Turkey Cove and Sevier, and Shelby's forces descending to North Cove to link up with McDowell. The force reunited the day and spent the night at the McDowell family plantation at Quaker Meadows, where they were joined by a 300-man contingent under Benjamin Cleveland and Joseph Winston. While camped atop Bedford's Hill on October 1st, the force's leaders bickered over who had full command. Charles McDowell was dispatched to the headquarters of General Horatio Gates to request he name a permanent commander. McDowell left his unit under the command of his brother, Joseph McDowell. On October 4th, the Over-Mountain men reached Ferguson's base at Gilberttown. Although Ferguson had evacuated eastward towards Charlotte to be closer to the main British army. The following day, while camped at Alexander's Ford along the Green River, a spy told the frontiersmen that Ferguson was headed for 96, and the force thus headed southeastward into South Carolina. On October 6th, the frontiersmen reached Cowpens, where they were joined by a force of 400 South Carolinians under James Williams and a smaller force of North Carolina militiamen under Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Hambright, including Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Hambright, Joseph Hardin, and Major John Hardin. A spy notified the force that Ferguson was camped 30 miles to the east, and a large number of frontiersmen marched through the night in hopes of forcing a confrontation. With the over-mountain men and Patriot forces fast approaching, Ferguson decided to entrench his 1,000-strong Loyalist force atop Kings Mountain, a 60-foot flat-top hill about 50 miles west of Charlotte. Near the North Carolina-South Carolina line, Patriot forces reached Kings Mountain on the afternoon of October 7 and formed a U-shape around the mountain, effectively flanking the Loyalists. Around 3 p.m., after several minutes of minor skirmishing, William Campbell told his men to shout like hell and fight like devils. 2 companies simultaneously opened fire on the Loyalist position. Shelby, Sevier, Williams, and Cleveland pushed from the north side of the mountain, while Campbell, Winston, and Joseph McDowell pushed from the south side. While Kings Mountain was difficult to scale, the mountain slopes were heavily wooded, providing Patriot riflemen ample cover. Both Campbell and Shelby twice attempted to charge up the mountain, but were driven back by Loyalist rifle fire. After about an hour, however, the frontier sharpshooters had taken a devastating toll on Loyalists' ranks, and Campbell and Shelby managed to reach the summit. Ferguson was killed by sharpshooters, and the remaining Loyalists surrendered. Loyalist casualties included 157 killed, 163 so severely wounded they were left on the field, and 698 captured. Patriot casualties were 28 killed and 62 wounded. Among the Patriot dead was South Carolina militia leader James Williams. John Sevier's brother, Robert, was also mortally wounded. The Loyalist prisoners were marched toward the mountains, pausing in northern Rutherford County, where several were put on trial for atrocities allegedly committed on the frontier, and 9 were hanged, including Colonel Ambrose Mills. His western flank now exposed, Cornwallis abandoned his invasion of North Carolina and fell back to Winnsboro, South Carolina. After the victory, Sevier dispatched Joseph Grier to Philadelphia to deliver news of the victory to the Continental Congress. Most of the over-mountain men returned to the Washington District, where in subsequent months, John Sevier, Joseph Hardin, and Arthur Campbell, brother of William, led an expedition against the Cherokee to secure in the frontier further. William Campbell returned to South Carolina in 1781 to aid Daniel Morgan's Continentals against another British incursion into the region, but arrived the day after Morgan's decisive victory at Cowpens. In later years, Sevier and Shelby played important roles in the establishment of Tennessee and Kentucky, respectively. Other influential over-mountain men included John Crockett, father of Davy Crockett, William Lenoir, Joseph Dixon, Daniel Smith, William Russell, and John Rea, all of whom were at Kings Mountain, and Anthony Bledsoe, who commanded the Home Guard Fort, the Holston settlement, while the main force was away. In 1980, Congress appropriated funds for the establishment of the Over-Mountain Victory National Historic Trail, which follows the original marching route of the Over-Mountain men between the mustering grounds at Sycamore Shoals State Historic Park and the battle site at Kings Mountain National Military Park, and includes several branch trails in Virginia and North Carolina. To the Easterners reading in the popular press, the lives of the mountain men seemed like a fairy tale of romance, adventure, and freedom. They may have been cleaned up their stories borderized, their attitude towards Indians and grizzly bears prettified, their exploits exaggerated, and their lives mythologized, all out of proportion. In reality, it was not so, as it was a dangerous time to be in. In Arizona during the 1820s, James Ohio Patty recalled 16 survived out of 160 in 1 year on the Gila River. Fatal quarrels with friends, thirst, starvation, storms, accidents, and disease took their toll. But Indians and grizzlies seem to have accounted for most to go under, as they preferred to call death. Grizzlies ran in packs of 50 and 60 back then, and had no fear of man. Trappers reported seeing as many as 220 in a day, weighing 1,000 pounds, and able to run to speeds up to 35 or more. Even when taking in their proclivity to exaggerate, the numbers must have been high. Some managed to cross the line that separates man from savage. One such man was Charlie Gardner, nicknamed Phil, because he hailed from the city of brotherly love. One season, he went trapping in the mountains with an Indian companion. There was a violent storm, and the two were given up for dead. A few days later, Phil rode into camp alone. He got down off his horse, pulled a part of a human leg out of his pack, and tossed it to the dogs, saying, "There, damn you! I won't have to gnaw on you any more." Thereafter, his friends called him Cannibal Phil. It was said that sometime later, he spent another rugged winter in the mountains. This time, the object of his culinary work was his Indian wife. In this land of plenty, food was almost an obsession. A hungry trapper might gorge himself with 4 or 5 pounds of meat at a sitting, not knowing when his next meal was coming. Crossing the hostile desert might reduce him to eating ants or crickets. Some reported making stew out of their mules' ears or soaking their moccasins until they were soft enough to chew on. It's not surprising that when he did find the game plentiful, a feast was held, and he ate until his meat bag, or stomach, was filled. In recent times, the beautiful Appalachian Trail has also proven to be deadly. Since 1974, there have been 11 Appalachian Trail murders. The most recent occurred in 2011, when a hiker from Indiana named Scott Lilly died from asphyxia by suffocation in an apparent homicide. The murder remains unsolved to this day. 3 years earlier, a terrifying repeat of an earlier hiking homicide was attempted by Randall Lee Smith, who had served 15 years in prison for the attempted murder of 2 hikers in 1981. In 2008, Smith shot 2 fishermen on the trail with the intent to kill them. Luckily, the pair survived. Smith's earlier victims, Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey, were both 27 years old and social workers from Maine. Mountford was shot, and Ramsey was beaten and stabbed. Due to lack of evidence, Smith only served half of his 30-year sentence and tragically went on to strike against hikers again. Being an experienced hiker is no bulwark against confronting your mortality on the trail. In 2001, an extremely seasoned hiker named Louise Chaput was found stabbed to death in the White Mountain section of the trail in New Hampshire. In 1996, hikers Julie Williams and Lolly Wienans were found with their throats cut in the Shenandoah National Park area of the trail in Virginia. One of the most tragic cases on the trail involved the case of Rebecca White and Claudia Brenner. The couple was having sex on the trail in 1988 when a man named Stephen Roy Carr shot at them. Carr later said at his trial that he had been enraged at the sight of 2 women having sex. White died from her injuries, and Carr was sentenced to life without parole. Regardless of what happened, the mountain men have left an indelible mark on American and world history. Alone or in small groups, they ventured across wide Missouri into the trackless Rockies, marking trails that would one day soon guide pioneers in covered wagons to Oregon and California. Today, they are followed by transcontinental railroads and freeways, These mountain men and their contemporaries were the embodiment of the free spirit and independence that made this country exceptional. They were the rebels against the restraints of society and chose to live their lives in the vast unknown, where death comes at any moment in a variety of ways. Many returned to civilization only partially to serve as guides for the immigrant trains that came west in the 1840s and 1850s. Today's superhighways and railroads cross the mountains and deserts over their trails. It seems ironic that the men who sought sanctuary in the unexplored West would, in the final analysis, be the ones who led the society they despised into their final refuge. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. Thank you for joining us once again. We hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.